The essential strategy that the Alter Rebbe is addressing in this chapter to the person who's suffering from timtum, clogged heart. And again, remember that a clogged heart is like the hardened heart of Paro, where their natural desire to be connected with Hashem is blocked, is to take note of the statement of the Zohar that if you have a thick log and you try to light it on fire and the fire won't catch, don't blame the fire, chop up the log. And a little bit, the Alter Rebbe, or maybe more than a little bit, takes a kind of harsh approach, and he says why the person is complaining that they're not inspired. Well, maybe it's them. Maybe they're not receptive to this message. Maybe they're not open to this fiery love. Maybe they're a little too clogged up with themselves. And the fact that they are somehow stunned that they're uninspired, like, come on, who are you kidding? Don't you, each person know, I mean, not us, don't you know that you're imperfect, that you have childish, impulsive behaviors that are still continuing to put a drag on your expression of godliness, that you're not free from self-inflicted spiritual clogging up of your vessels. So rather than, I'm going to use this word complaining, it's a little harsh, rather than complaining, the recommendation is you have to, again, fire up your godliness, let that godliness, I'm sorry, fire up your, when I say fire up, that's the wrong expression. You got to chop up your humanity, make yourself more receptive to godliness, and let that godliness come in. Now, as a result, I can get pretty frustrated. So where do I take out and where is the proper, appropriate place, not just to relieve my tension, but where is the proper place to express my anger? It's towards my Yetzer Hara. This Yetzer Hara is not here to help me. He says he is, but he's not here to be beneficial to me. And there is a value in getting fired up. That's where the word came into my head against in a harsh and I'll just use it, angry way. There is a value to being angry at the Yetzer Hara, especially as we'll see. And the Alter Rebbe will take us through some particular strategies for how that we can express and conjure up this anger. So here we go. Again, we did these lines already, just backing up to get a little bit of a running start. V'gam yarim aleha b'kol. One should rise up and one should stir up and one should scream at and get angry at the Yetzer Hara. I know it's not polite and so on, but at a certain point, that's necessary. There's like no more Mr. Nice Guy. It's not about being patient and cooperative. He's not your friend. We're not going to, again, to borrow the term, we're not going to negotiate this. We're just going to step in and say, this is intolerable behavior. Veroigas and with anger, and again, that's a positive illustration of anger. Everything can be in the service of Hashem. So while we generally discourage anger, reminder that one of the distinctive aspects of the strategy of this chapter is that it's self-initiated. Remember, in the previous chapters, we talked about how a person should address distracting thoughts that come upon him, either while he's in the middle of davening, which is to ignore it, or while he's in the middle of his regular day, which is to be sort of gratified. Oh, great, now I get to do the mitzvah of not listening. But now, again, that we can ignore and ignore for so long, now it's necessary, or now the strategy is for us to be on top of it, and we initiate this self-introspection, and we initiate this attempt to not just sort of stick our fingers in our ears and say, no, 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 I'm not listening to you, although that's a value in that. That is a valuable strategy. The self-initiated circumstance of this chapter is when we are attacking the Nefesh HaBahamis itself. We're not simply ignoring it, we are actually going on the offensive. Kamayim Razal, like the statement that tells us, Lo'olam yargiz adam yetzer tov al yetzer hara shenemar rogzu v'goymer. A person should forever become angered, scream at, whatever the phrase is, his Yetzer Tov onto his Yetzer Hara. That is, again, if you have an unpleasant neighbor, or we all know the story from Yaakov Avinu when he's gonna encounter Esav, he takes a three-pronged strategy, right? He offers him gifts, he offers him friendship, and he prepares for battle. And he davens to Hashem. Well, it's time for battle with this Yetzer Hara because he's not getting the hint and he's not going away. And now that frustration, again, when we are on top of it and we are initiating it, it's now time for it to be employed. The Hainu, this means lirgois a nefesh habahamis, to become angered at the nefesh habahamis. She Yetzer Hara, which is the Yetzer Hara. Now, the Alter Rebbe here, why is he making this point, the nefesh habahamis and the Yetzer Hara? We have generally spoken about the difference between those two terms. We sometimes a little sloppily use them interchangeably. They're not identical, but in this context, they are working in tandem. The essential difference between the Nefesh HaBahamis and the Yetzer Hara is the Nefesh HaBahamis is not looking for evil. It's simply looking for its own benefit, like an animal. And animals don't do evil things. They may do unpleasant things, but they are driven purely by their desire for self. So the most intuitive aspect of the Nefesh HaBahamis is I am, I exist, and therefore everything is centered around what affirms my existence. That's the entirety of a Nefesh HaBahamis' agenda. What affirms my existence? The Yetzer Hara, like its name implies, is after Ra. It wants bad. It doesn't just want pleasure. It doesn't just want self-satisfaction. It is driven by the desire to be deliberately evil to Hashem, against godliness. So whereas the Nefesh HaBahamis can be redirected, like the analogy of hooking your plow up to an ox, and as the Talmud says, there is much harvest in the power of the ox. So we're not just looking to kill the ox, we're looking to redirect it. We're looking to redirect our Nefesh HaBahamis. When it comes to the Yetzer Hara we are looking to completely eradicate. So in this circumstance, the Nefesh HaBahamis and the Yetzer Hara are working in tandem because their objective is the validation of self. Remember our rule that while a person can, though they may not, but they can do a mitzvah purely for the sake of Hashem, there's no such thing as doing an Aveira altruistically. An Aveira is always linked to some benefit that it brings the person, even if it's the benefit of rebellion. Like you said up, I say down. You said don't do it, I'm going to do it. So in this context, the Yetzer Hara and the Nefesh HaBahamis are one and the same. B'kol rash v'roiges, and the Alter Rebbe here calls upon the person to become passionate. Now, again, we generally think, well, we are Chabad. We are learning Chabad Hasidus. Chabad means the mind overrules the heart. It shapes the heart, and so on. And sometimes we can get a little too caught up in our heads, a little too much about our seichel, and we think that what we generally loosely call our emotions, that is our passions, are exclusively the product of our intellect. I think about godliness, I become excited about being aligned with godliness. I think about godliness, I become reverent to godliness. Here, the Alter Rebbe is appealing as a strategy to a little bit more of raw emotion. Remember, the long, short way is to engage the intellect, to have a mastery of godliness to the point that my character, emotions, follow along in the wake of my intellect. That's the long, short way. The short, long way is I appeal right to the emotion. I get right to it. And this is a little bit more of a direct appeal right to my emotion. I got to be angry at my Nefesh HaBahamis because it is not interested in my benefit and it's getting in the way. It's a nuisance and annoying, and it's such a nuisance and so annoying that it is so completely tripped up my love for Hashem that I have timtum alev. My heart is clenched and I'm not feeling that love for God. So now I need to become more passionate about it. And that's what the Alter Rebbe is appealing to here, is it's like kind of a form of getting angry. But remember that it's controlled because I have initiated it. I didn't just sneak up on me in the middle of my davening or even in the middle of my workday. I am in control of it. Loimerlo, and I say to it, Atara, you are evil. Because he doesn't say he's evil. He doesn't say, hi, I'm the Yitzhar here to ruin your life. He says, I'm here for you. I'm looking out for your best interest. This is what's the best. And he even is, as we call it, with a Zaydin Zupitza, he's wearing a silk kapata because he's presenting himself as being pious. Verusha, you are wicked, umashukitz, and disgusting, umatuav, umanuval, and filthy, etc., etc. This is kind of harsh language. That's not nice. And it doesn't seem to be so academic. What's this doing in academic text? Well, this is what the Alter Rebbe's whole message is, that we do not bifurcate our intellect and our character. Yes, of course, our goal is the intellect should shape the character, but we're not dismissing the character. We're not saying, well, the character is from some other part of your life. We see them as one continuum. Head, heart, hands is all one continuum. And right now, what we need is to turn up the fire against the Yetzer Hara. Because as long as we think that we can kind of work this out, there's no opportunity for us to get rid of it. It's a little bit like Yetzias Mitzrayim. One of the interpretations of the purpose of the plagues was that we had to come to realize that Mitzrayim was no longer an option. Because if we imagine that Moshe goes to Paro and he says, send the people out so they may serve me, and Paro says, okay, fine. The people might have said, you see, he's not such a bad guy. We can work this out, And again, we have to come to realize that there's no way that we can work it out with the Yetzer Hara. And as long as we think we can, he's one. Kekol Hashem shekar lechachamenu zal. Be'emes. All the different ways that, again, this is not original with the Alter Rebbe, that we find, and again, even though your mother said not to call names and use your words and not your hands, sometimes it becomes so necessary that we just have to come and recognize it. Because as long as we think that everybody's a nice guy and everything is fine and so on, we're less likely to be motivated. We are familiar that in the second parsha, in the whole Torah, it tells us that Noach was a righteous man in his generation. And everyone remembers there are two primary interpretations. One, he was righteous despite his generation. And the other is, well, he was only considered righteous within his generation. And we raise the question, we say, well, why, if there is a positive, a pleasant interpretation, why even mention the unpleasant interpretation? What do you got to say that for? Just leave it at the pleasant interpretation. And amongst the many reasons why we say, because if we don't realize that, we make the mistake of saying, well, we should all aspire to be like Noach. It's not designed to beat up on Noach, but we got later models. We got Abraham, we got Moshe Rabbeinu. And again, it's not about beating up Noach because Noach didn't have a Noach to learn from. It's the message being that we have to identify it. And if we don't identify it, we think, well, everything's fine. If everything's fine, then everything's fine. And we're not here just for everything is fine. Remember, we didn't come to the Alter Rebbe because we weren't doing Torah and mitzvahs. We came because it wasn't fine, because I had Timtum Alev. And we don't want to just have Timtum Alev. We want to have a meaningful, vibrant, enthusiastic, exciting, uplifting relationship with Hashem. And we're not experiencing it. So if we don't come with something, we're, God forbid, not going to have it. And we say to him, and this is a little bit, the Alter Rebbe starts to take a different path here, as we'll develop. How long that we say, what, so to speak, who do you think you are that you are going to block the infinity of Hashem, who fills all worlds? He was, he is, and he will be b'shava, all the same. Even in the space that I am standing. Just like he was before he created the world, without change. Like we say every morning in the davening, Ani Hashem lo shanisi. I am Hashem, I do not change. We're going to come back to some of these words. I just want to get the idea. Kihu, because he, God, is lamayla miyazman, is beyond time. Va'ata, and you, Yetzer Hara Menuvel, are disgusting, v'chulu. That machish emes, you are denying the truth, hanir le'inayim, which is obvious to us. The kula kameh kaloi mamish, everything that comes before God has no stature. Bebechinas ria chushias, as we can observe visibly. Now, what the Alter Rebbe has sort of shifted our strategy to here is the non-substantiveness of the Yetzer Hara. And we have talked about this before, that we learn what is eternal and what is temporal. One of the great lessons of the Sukkah is We know that there will be a sukkah again next year. And one of the great lessons, tragic lessons of 9/11 is we don't know that there'll be a World Trade Center again next year. But if it looks in the moment which one is temporary and which one is permanent, it appears to be far more permanent. But we all know, whether it's the BlackBerry or bell bottoms, that all of those things are going to expire. And what is going to truly be forever is the oneness of Hashem. Now, this is true particularly, or is most tangible, based on, again, the core message of the Baal Shem Tov, summarized in the phrase non-literal tzimtzum. And again, this idea, as is encapsulated in the song, and I don't mean to be silly, and it is a big point of contention. And again, of Hashem is here, Hashem is there, up, down, right, left, and all around. And we've talked about this before. There is a whole school of talking about Torah-educated people. I'm not talking about people who don't know what they're talking about, who say, no, that's not true. God is not up, down, right, left, and all around. God is in heaven. God is not in this room, to be silly. God is not in the bathroom. God is in heaven, and he's watching over everything. Nobody denies, nobody's limiting God, but how could, if God's in this room, how come it looks like the boxes in this room and the table and the chair and the pencil? Well, this is a chiddush, the innovative message of the Baal Shem Tov, and here it comes into play because again, the argument of the world is, I'm here. What is God going to do for me? But the presumption of my own existence is the premise. And Chassidus comes along to say the presumption of existence is Hashem. It's summarized in the phrase, Elokus is the presumed, the pshitis, and creation is the innovation. V'olam b'schatshus. So it's not that God came here to tell the world what to do. The world is here to fulfill the purpose of Hashem. But what happens when we get things mixed up? It's like, people have probably had this experience. You hire someone, and all of a sudden you're working for them. You're doing it for them. This is upside down. Yetzer hara, how can you make an argument that you should dominate, you should push out the infinity of Hashem? Your existence is only here as a method for me to express the infinity of Hashem. At the very end of this chapter, we're going to reference a story that the Alter Rebbe referenced earlier that comes from the Zohar about a king who wants to test the virtue of his son. So he hires someone to try and provoke the son into sinful behavior. And even that person who he hired doesn't want the son to fall for their trickery. They want the son to resist all of their temptations, but they are committed to fulfilling the purpose that the king hired them for. So they have to use all of their skills and all of their trickery. But they don't believe it. They know they're acting. But what happens is we get so caught up in the act, we forget that it's an act. We start to think that this is real. And this is the point that the Alter Rebbe is taking us to now, that the Yetzer hara is not substantive. It's not real. It's just a disruption for the expression of the infinity of Hashem. And it knows it. The Yetzer hara knows it. He doesn't even believe it, but he's on an assignment. He's got this mission. His job is to try and dissuade us from the service of Hashem. So we have to unmask him. We have to say, we know you're kidding. You're kidding, and we know it, and you know it. And the Yetzer hara ultimately will have to say, you're right, you got me, but he can't give in so quickly. V'hinei al yedei zeh yoyel nafshay lekis lahare neh be'emes yichud orein soif b'riach hoshias v'loy b'chinas shmiya v'avana levada which goes magam acher. Now here again, the Alter Rebbe does make what I'm going to call an academic reference in this strategy. Predominantly, we have been in these lines speaking about a emotional, I'm calling it that, strategy for screaming down the Yetzer hara by completely rejecting it and saying you're terrible and horrible and I'm not going along with you and you're bad and you're not interested in my good and God forbid, like the bully who's trying to get the kid to participate, and throw water balloons at the teacher, not because they care about the kid, although they offer this false sense of belonging and friendship, but they're doing it only for themselves. Now the Alter Rebbe has sort of shifted to another level, which is true of bullies as well, that the Yetzer Hara that has no substance. It isn't even true. It isn't even real. It's going to expire. And here the Alter Rebbe, it does sort of circles back a little bit to an academic awareness. He sort of got us all, our passions raised up. So we became fired up against this Yetzer Hara. And now the Alter Rebbe is not just saying this because it gets us going, but it's rooted in an academic truth. Again, the academic truth of I am Hashem, I do not change. Non-literal tzimtzum. And this the Alter Rebbe referenced a few lines ago. We say it every day in the davening. I am Hashem, I do not change. And we ask the question, well, what does that mean? God created the world and God is affected by the world. Yes, but God is affected by the world because he so chooses. Meaning, we believe very seriously that it's, I'll use this phrase, very important to Hashem that we do mitzvahs. And we ask the question, well, if we do mitzvahs, does that mean that we can change Hashem? And our answer is yes, right? We believe in reward and punishment. We believe there is a correlation between our behavior and God's response. Well, if that's the case, doesn't that mean that God is somehow limited and contoured? And our pushback to that is, well, that's God's free choice. Meaning, a parent tells a child, if you clean up your room, I'll buy you ice cream. He cleans up his room. He says, I want ice cream. Could the parents, do they have the capability to say, tough, nope, no, I'm not doing it? Of course they could. Meaning, they're not compelled in a reflexive manner to buy ice cream for the kid. What they have done as parents is they have committed themselves to buying ice cream. They have linked themselves to the ice cream buying. They have committed themselves. That's a voluntary tzimtzum that the parent has engaged himself to when he says, I will live up to my commitment. And Hashem does the same. Hashem says, I will change the consequence based on your behavior, reward and punishment. But again, could Hashem say, no, I'm not doing it anyway? I changed my mind, tell him I lied. Of course he could. That's what we mean Hashem has not changed. I mean, he's not compelled like reflexively, meaning if I don't know, put paint on a piece of wood, I've changed it. That's not voluntary. That's an absolute cause and effect. If I let go of the pencil, it falls. That's gravity. That's absolute. So the infinity of Hashem is, and again, this is the academic point that we're now trying to make into a personal point. When we say that God is in this room, no different than he is in the Beis Hamikdash, no different than God's existence is prior to all of creation, and therefore, how could the Yetzer Hara have any impact on it? Now we know this again from the essential premise of God's existence, meaning one of the lessons we learn is in a Torah scroll, the first column is blank. Now it's practical because otherwise it would be right up against the Eitz Chaim, the rolling stick, and it would be very hard to read. But there's a great life lesson that before we start the story of creation, we have to realize that there's something that comes before creation, namely Hashem. No different than a child. Or again, anyone is vulnerable to say, well, life began when I began, or as far back as I can imagine. So I can imagine back in my parents' life. Maybe I can imagine back my grandparents' life. But there is this presumption, how did it get here? I don't know. It just got here. And we are being reminded that there's something that came before all of existence. The premise of Torah is God's existence. So we've all heard this, do you believe in God? It's upside down. That's the absolute premise. The premise is God's existence. The question is whether or not we exist, which the answer is yes. How do we know we exist? Because it says so in Torah. We've talked about this before. Rabbi Friedman points out that David has to kill Goliath before he can marry the king's daughter, because in order to validate my existence, I have to be able to serve the king, because the king certainly exists, God certainly exists, so my existence becomes validated by my capacity to be of service to that. It's somewhat similar to the idea, again, maybe at a level of a person joins the military, because we know that the country exists, even though, of course, we know that it doesn't, because it can come and go, right? It can be here and not be here. All those countries, they come and go. And therefore, I think, well, I don't really exist. But if I can serve the country, then I certainly do exist, because I am in service of that which truly exists. So here the Alter Rebbe cycles back in the personal level to this academic truth that when I come to recognize that God exists and the Yetzer Hara isn't even real, and I know it because I know that that cupcake is just here for a moment. I know that that technology is going to be laughed at as ancient history in 15 minutes. I know that that thing that I am pursuing with absolute passion is going to ultimately wind up in the garbage heap. So why am I so caught up with it? It's not even true. And in this case, the Yetzer Hara knows he's not true. He knows he's kidding. Or acting better. He knows he's acting. And what we have to expose it. Now, I don't go to Broadway theater, but I've been told that there's became an issue. It's sort of come back around. People bring their cell phones. So you're in the middle of the play, all of a sudden the guy's cell phone goes off. Now, it's obviously rude, it's disruptive, but the problem, the bigger, the deeper problem is it breaks the whole spell. I mean, the whole idea is we think we're living in Shakespeare's time, or we think we're living in some other world. And when he introduces that, he violates the covenant between the actors and the audience, meaning we forgot that this is an illusion. We wanted to be in the illusion. Okay, we're not here to comment on Broadway, but this is the what we're trying to do with the Yetzer Hara. We're trying to break the illusion that the Yetzer Hara has created that that's real. You know, I couldn't live without it type of thing. So here we go with the Alter Rebbe reminds us that this is not just something that we heard, but it's something that we see. Now, what is this a reference to? We are familiar, Shema Yisrael. Why do we cover our eyes when we say Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad? Because when I look around, it looks like the pencil and the scissor and the table. How can you tell me this that God is the only existence? Again, when we say Hashem Echad, we don't mean there's one God like there's one book on the table. We mean God is truly oneness. So how can you tell me that God is oneness? Look at all the things. So I have to cover my eyes. I can only hear it, that is, I can imagine it, because what life seems to present to me is something far different. And we may sarcastically say, you're going to believe me or your lying eyes. But we know that our eyes do lie. That is, we want to make sense out of things, so we trick ourselves into assuming that we understand the patterns. This is one of the deceptions of science. Yes, science is very useful, but it's this irrational pursuit to try and make order out of things. And then as we realize, the deeper we get into the science, the more we realize that the science becomes art as well. It's also not this rigid sense of absolute pattern. So we start to become enamored by it. Why? Because of what we see. Well, imagine if instead of seeing the table and the chair, I see the godliness. And again, the mechanism to that is, like we say in English, you see what I mean, is an intellectual understanding. And if I start to see everything through that lens of seeing the infinity of Hashem under every circumstance, I will be less distracted by the individual parts. Right now, I have to cover my eyes, and I can hear the idea. But then I walk out into the real or the false world, and I see all of this stuff that grabs my attention. So, again, the Yetzer Hara is clogging my heart. What's he clogging it with? The pursuit of pleasures, the pursuit of some aspiration that we are exposing, and it knows is a lie. It knows that even he doesn't want you to do it, but he's got an assignment from Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe says, "Shezehu shoresh kol ha'avoda," and hopefully, like I say in every line, this is the whole point of Tanya. Look what the Alter Rebbe says here. This is the root, like a root that grows into a tree, the root of all avoda. And again, it's actually today's Hayom Yom, interestingly. The root of all avoda is to search for God in every circumstance. Today's Hayom Yom, I hadn't thought of this until we read the Hayom this morning. Today's Hayom Yom says that everything a Jew sees or hears is an opportunity to learn a lesson in the service of Hashem. This is a very classic teaching. I'm sure you've all heard this before in some context. And it's codified in today's Hayom Yom. It comes from the Baal Shem Tov. What does this mean? It's not just, everything is Hashgacha Pratis. You people think everything is. And everything is an opportunity. Yes, all true. But it's something far deeper. that our pursuit of finding the service of Hashem is in everything. Meaning, rather than saying I have this thing, now how can I use it in the service of Hashem? We're saying, why do I have this thing? Only because it is a mechanism for the service of Hashem. Much later in the Igeres HaKodesh, towards the end, it's like letter 29, I think, I'm learning it in a different group. The Alter Rebbe communicates to us not only that I should see every physical thing as a mechanism to serve Hashem, I want to see it as Hashem. Just like I look at a mezuzah and I see it as godly, I want to look at my car and see it as godly as my mezuzah. That's a level, it's almost unattainable. And there's a lengthy letter where the Alter Rebbe is really trying to drag us to that, which is really hard. Because as we know, I wake up in the morning, the first thing I realize is I exist. And that's why the bracha says, well, thank you, Hashem, because I exist. But again, the premise is my own existence. And we hope to sort of move along through the day and get over that mindset where I got to start off that it's my existence that makes me, I'm here, and then we want to sort of get beyond that. So the Alter Rebbe continues, and he says, "V'hatam l'fi shebe'emes ein shuma moshes klal b'sitra achra." There is no, it's not a competition. There is no stature. There is no substance to the sitra achra. All it is oppositional to godliness, and it doesn't even believe it. So again, the root of all avodah is the endless pursuit of finding the godliness that is the purpose for all existence. Not despite the existence, that is the existence. And the presentation of the Yetzer Hara is completely upside down. The crucial word, because the Yetzer Hara is like darkness. Now, in darkness, we find two concepts. On the one hand, we say, Yetzer Hara u'vera choshech. You may recognize it. It's in the evening davening, that God forms light and creates darkness. So from that perspective, darkness is a real thing. Darkness is an actual existence. On the other hand, we say, what is darkness? It's the absence of light. How do you know? Because as soon as you put the light on, the darkness disappears. The darkness has no substance. It's described in the plague of darkness that darkness was like a gel. It had physical contour to it. You could touch it. It had actual physical shape, which is a deeper form of darkness than we are accustomed to. The darkness that we know is just the absence of light, as evidenced by I turn the light on, and this is the key word, umemela, effortlessly. We've seen this before, where the Alter Rebbe quoted Shlomo HaMelech, who said, I have seen the superiority of wisdom over foolishness, like light over darkness, that it's immediate. As soon as I know that that's not a ghost, it's really my little brother trying to scare me, as soon as I know that it's just a movie, it's not real, as soon as I see it, that's it, game over. I mean, the person, I thought it was the bad guy. I see, it's really just my brother with a sheet over his head. That's it, game over. It's no longer scary. What's happened automatically? As soon as the light goes on, I'm no longer scared. The light effortlessly chases away the darkness. Effortlessly. That's the crucial phrase. It effortlessly chases away the darkness. V'kacha sitra achra, so to the sitra achra. Af sheyesh ba chayes harbe lachiyes kol balachayim atmeim v'nefashos umas akum begam nefesh b'hamash v'Yisrael kanal. You'll argue, the Alter Rebbe sort of anticipates the pushback, the counter-argument. How can you tell me that this Yetzer Hara has no real substance? Isn't it constantly giving life force to all of this ungodly stuff, whether it's items of the physical world whose godliness is not accessible, or even my own non-God-oriented character, the buy me, take me, get me urge that stirs up within me. So how can we say that that's not real? Look, if it's not real, look at all the stuff it's producing. And again, I mean, we think about our Hollywood world. How could that not be real? It certainly looks real. And again, we can ultimately expose it. One day they're going to say, it doesn't really matter who hits home runs and wins the Super Bowl. Well, what do you mean? Meaning it's only sustained because everyone agrees to pretend that it's important. And every once in a while, when somebody steps out of that, It threatens the whole existence. You know, it's just a baseball game. Oh, you can't say that. We're spending hundreds of billions of dollars all on something that's pretend. It doesn't really matter. It's not genuinely true. And what happens? We get so caught up in it, we know more about that than we do about our children. We can recite every politician, actor, athlete, popular podcaster, and so on. Who's your child's first grade teacher? I don't know. Somebody. What are they learning? Meaning I am more fluent in my baseball team than I am my child. And what are you doing? Right? Because it's all false, but we get so caught up. It feels so real. It's like the fake moon landing. We get so caught up, it feels so real, we can't imagine that it's not real. And it threatens to unravel so many institutions that nobody wants to consider it, even though we all know it's fake. The emperor has no clothes, but we're so invested in it that if we don't keep up the myth, there's so much fallout. And again, back to a more personal, one of the hardest things about tshuva is not just giving up Red Lobster and Saturday golf. It's about kind of pulling the thread out on all of this falseness that I created as my objective. I thought the most important thing is to have the fanciest cars, to have the most sophisticated college degree. And then when I come into a society that says, well, that's just a tool to serve Hashem, it's very hard at a very emotional and psychological and whatever level to sort of pull the carpet out from that whole basically falseness and say the emperor has no clothes. And again, I can point to 100 million people who are all telling me the emperor has clothes because they're equally invested in it. But one day we're going to say, you know what? It doesn't really matter who wins the Super Bowl. It doesn't really matter who makes the movie. One of the things we learned from COVID is we can live without that because it doesn't have innate substance. It's not real. It's not eternal. And we get caught up in the temporal and not in the eternal. Oops. It's very difficult. So here we start to see this Alter Rebbe saying, you got to pull the plug on this ephemeral. It looks so real, like I said before, but $100 billion is invested in it and trillions and so on and so forth. That is, the whole world is being sustained by this. We say, it is only part of the act. It is Hashem who is giving it its true existence, again, for the opportunity for us to have genuine free choice, because it was so incredibly obvious that God existed. We would say Nasa v'nishma, but it wouldn't be as substantive as it was during the time of Purim, when it wasn't so obvious that God existed, because there was a decree out there for the total annihilation of every Jew. And there was no reasonable expectation that you'd ever get out of that, because there was nobody outside of that kingdom who could advocate on your behalf. And yet we committed ourselves then. We upheld that which we had committed to. So it's a little easier on a nice sunny day to commit to our godliness. Not so easy on a cold, rainy day when you got Haman out there. That's where the true commitment is. It certainly looks that way. Who you betting on in 1950? The Frierdiker Rebbe in a wheelchair or Shopping Mall America? I'm betting on Northbrook Court. That'll be around forever. Oops, right? Again, in that moment, it certainly looks like it. It certainly looks that way. It certainly has all of the energy and life force. Anyone want to buy a BlackBerry? And therefore, all of it melts away when we shine the Kedusha. But again, think about it in our society. Nobody wants to hear it because we've all got this myth that we've all built up that, whatever it is, my analogies, the Super Bowl movies are real, and that's important. And what we do is kind of unimportant. And knowing everything about the political situation is crucial. And knowing who my kid's first grade teacher is, well, that's boring. Who cares? So we get distracted by the fake away from the substantive. Again, once we shine the light, it all goes away. And again, God forbid, sometimes it comes about in a scary thing. A person gets sick or something, all of a sudden they're not so worried about who their state senator is. Somebody has an awareness, all of a sudden, who's playing in the Super Bowl is not so important. Hashem has granted us the capacity to overcome it. It seems insurmountable. Walter Smith, or his name was Fred Smith, started FedEx. You're gonna compete with the post office. You're gonna compete with Coca-Cola, right? Most people don't win, but you can overcome it. It seems insurmountable. And again, we're just thinking of the Frierdiker Rebbe coming to America in a wheelchair in 1940. And people, his friends, nice people, not mean people trying to make him feel bad, said to him, Rebbe, you give it up. Like it's, we'll buy you a shul, you'll live out your life here, but it's not happening in America. They weren't dumb people, and they weren't mean. They weren't trying to make him feel bad. That was the reasonable thing. Who would have argued against that? Oh, I would have known. I'm not so smart. Thank God we have Rebbes and great tzaddikim, because they had that vision. They could see godliness. They saw America as a godly place. That was unimaginable. It was unimaginable. Godliness can thrive in Shtetl. It's not thriving in, again, the world of shopping malls. But Hashem says we do. That a person can rise up above it, and he can expose, again, the emperor has no clothes. He can expose it for its nothingness. That he will see it in that way. So here the Alter Rebbe returns the power to us. So when he started this chapter, we felt like victims. I have timtum alev, my heart is clenched. The fire is not catching me. So the Alter Rebbe says, stop blaming the fire and chop up yourself and stop being like surprised. Why am I not inspired? Who are you kidding? You got dirty fingernails. You've misbehaved in your life. You have the residual impact of your misbehavior. And now it's time for you to rise up again. And the Alter Rebbe says that Yetzer Hara, all of that temptation, it has no substance. It's not real. You need to expose its falseness and let your essence thrive. You need to get that going. And here the Alter Rebbe says, and here's the good news. When you will make that initial step, when you will make that movement, Hashem will respond. He can't wait to help you. He can't wait to help you. So a little bit, we've been blaming God. Why is the fire not getting me excited? Why is it not making me consumed with passion? Well, you're a little bit too clogged up yourself. I'm doing this work. Good news. Hashem is not standing on the side with his arms crossed, waiting for you to do it. Hashem says, just open up like a pinhole and I'll open up like a ballroom. I'm here to help. But you got to listen, it's like the radio. The radio waves are in the room. You don't turn the radio on, you're not going to hear the radio. You got to turn the radio on to receive it. You got to be receptive. L'kaim Mashakosov, as Hashem says, he promises, Mishama Num Hashem, from there I will drag him down, says Hashem. I will help you, but you got to be receptive to it. Hashem says, I've tried. I created the world. I put you in the Garden of Eden. You rebelled. I recreated the world. I showed you the miracle of rescuing you while the world was being flooded. You then rebelled. So Abraham, what did he do? He said, I believe in God. Thank you. Okay, here it is. He's like an overeager Lubavitcher. I'm mildly interested in Yiddishkeit. I'll be over in 10 minutes. Here's mezuzahs. Here's sign your kids up for camp. Here's tefillin. What's with the blowtorch? I can't wait to help you. But you got to be a little bit receptive. Just open the door. If you're not going to open the door, you're not going to get any help. So the Alter Rebbe says, the Hainu, Shemesirim, Shalos, B'yecholtu, Mesagnim, and Avakayach, V'Rishus, Shenasan, La Lag B'yatzmai, Neged, Kedushas, Nefesh, Halakis. Hashem says, I can disempower him. He has no real existence. He works for me, the Yetzer Hara. I can pull his credentials at any time. He forgets. He thinks he's the boss. He's not. I'm the boss. And as soon as I pull the credentials, he's gone. I once went to visit a friend of mine. He has a business, and the people were complaining that this guy did that. It was like first grade. I mean, they were complaining, and they said, why did you let him do that? He said, first of all, I own the company. I don't have to explain myself to you. You work for me. Like, hey, slow down there, cowboy. You work for me. So the Yetzer Hara, God says, he works for me. I turn him off, he's off. I pull the plug, he's out. I turn it down, he's no more. And then effortlessly, that's the key phrase, effortlessly, it goes away. A quick story. There was a restaurant, some fancy Trafe restaurant in New York, and it was bought out by a kosher restaurateur. And one of their goals was to keep it at that same style. So, of course, having to change the recipes, et cetera, make it kosher. One of the challenges they ran into was that this restaurant had a very fine wine list. Well, a lot of the fine wines are not mavushal, and therefore you have an issue because what are you going to do if the waiters are not Jewish? So they said, okay, we'll make a policy that only Jewish waiters can pour wine. They said, but there is such a position that says that if the person whose cup it's being poured into is not Shabbos observant, that perhaps that makes it what's called, quote, yayin nesach, disqualified because of our concern that this wine may have somehow been used in an idolatrous practice. That's the halacha. So one of the people in this committee was a Lubavitcher chassid, and he said, well, people came to the Rebbe for koshel bracha. At the end of Rosh Hashanah, Simchas Torah, Pesach, and Shavuos, after the Rebbe made the Havdalah himself, people would line up for hours, and the Rebbe would pour wine into their cup. Imagine everybody's seen the videos. Now, that wine was not mavushal, and there was no vetting process, and certainly there were non-Shabbos observant people who came to the Rebbe. And therefore, this chassid wanted to suggest that the fact that the Rebbe poured wine into their cup, which was not mavushal, especially on Pesach, the Pesach wine was not mavushal, is clearly evidence that that does not disqualify it. So there was another guy who says, look, I'm not a Lubavitcher chassid. I want to check this with my Rav. So he went to his Rav, obviously not a Lubavitcher chassid, and he tells him this idea, and he says, what do you think? The guy says, well, that's no evidence. You can't derive anything halachically from this, because whenever a Jew comes before the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in that moment he does tshuva. And therefore, at that moment, you could say that he's come to that level. This is a story that happened. So again, whatever the halacha is beyond the scope of our discussion. But what we see is, right, even a person who may be imperfect, they can have a moment where they have such a level of tshuva that everything disappears. It all goes away. And not only is this a story with the Rebbe, but here the Alter Rebbe brings a story in the Chumash. We find this exact phenomena by the story of the Meraglim. So just very briefly, you remember that after we straighten out that whole thing with the golden calf, and we seemingly are back on track, and we're full, all systems go on our way into the land of Israel, we get a little panicky again. And we say to Moshe, we want to send in spies or scouts or whatever we translate it as for them to see what's going on with the land. So Moshe Rabbeinu picks 12 people, leaders of tribes, great men. They go, and 10 of them come back and they say, it's a land that consumes its inhabitants. We're going to die. Even God can't help us. And God is pretty angry at that. And ultimately, though it's beyond this point, that's why we spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness, not because of the golden calf exclusively, but because of the story of the spies. And the next morning, as we'll read, the people, after they were told, they said, okay, we're going to go right now. We're going to go. And God says, don't go. I'm not with you. And they went. They tried to charge into the land of Israel, and they were killed. And we are told that they are the, quote, dried bones who will rise up first and be returned. That's the basic story. Hopefully everybody is familiar with this basic story. It's in the book of Bamidbar in the parsha called Shlach. So here the Alter Rebbe derives a lesson from this. We find this in that story. What happened? Initially they said, the spies came back and they said, forget it. These people are way too strong for us. And by us, they meant for Hashem. Even Hashem can't help us. Our luck has run out. We left Egypt, split the sea, brought us manna from heaven, gave us the Torah, but that's it. We've met our match, and these guys are going to destroy us. Even God can't help us. But it's a pretty bad thing to say, That's a bad day. And when you're, out from Egypt and repaired, and you have a bad day, that's a bad day to have a bad day. right? And that becomes the baddest of bad days. That's Tisha B'Av. The first tragic event which occurred on Tisha B'Av is that's the day the spies came back and gave this statement, and God said, you're crying now for no reason. I'm going to give you a reason to cry. And that's when Tisha B'Av became a magnet for all of the tragedies that occurred on Tisha B'Av, the National Jewish Day of Mourning, when the temples were destroyed and so on. But that's what happened. But then, Hashem, what happened? They said, we don't believe you. We don't believe that God can help us. But then, as I mentioned, but then after God said, okay, you're not going into the land, you're going to wander for 40 years, etc., they said, okay, we're ready to go right now. Now, this makes no logical sense. How did they suddenly decide that now they believe in God? You just told me you don't believe in God. God said you're in trouble. They said, okay, we believe in God. This makes no logical sense. It's not that God suddenly showed them some miracle. Okay, here's our strategy. Here's our super weapon, and so on. So why are they not suddenly changed? What happened? Moshe told them how much Hashem was upset with them. And he swore he wouldn't take them into the land. So why does this suddenly cause them to have a change? They thought there's no way we can do this. God cannot conquer these 31 kings. We're toast. We have no capacity. So Moshe says, you're right, you're in trouble, you're not going. Says, okay, now we believe we can go. This makes no sense. Why do they suddenly have a change of their mentality? Because Jewish people always believe in Hashem's ability. They absolutely do. They just said we don't. They said even God can't overthrow these 31 kings. What do you mean they believe in Hashem? What do you mean they have faith in Hashem? What happened? But what happened? The Nefesh HaBahamis gets in the way. It asserts itself with aggression. It becomes defiant. It becomes abrasive. It becomes audacious. It blocks the godliness. And therefore, Hashem models this behavior where he screams at, he derides the evil, not the essence of the Jew, but the evil. He says to this Yetzer Hara, stop it. Stop saying that you have the authority. Stop saying that you know better. Stop with the anxiety. Stop with the doubt. Stop with the questioning. Hashem says, the falseness will die here. The falseness will die in the wilderness. But the essence of the Jew is true. That's what's truly there. We get so cluttered and corroded with the nonsense that what we have to do is not fight the darkness, just turn on the light and chase it away. We have to reawaken that level. And that's what I'm going to do, again, to the bad. The bad is where God is pouring out his wrath. When they heard this harshness, they broke their heart. Remember, in our context, that's a positive. They broke open this clenched heart because God berated the Yetzer Hara. That's what we need to do. We need to berate the Yetzer Hara. And therefore effortlessly. That's the key phrase. That God didn't give them Amunah, they have the Amunah. It's just lost. It's like the classic message of Chabad. I'm not here to give you anything. I'm here to help you find what you already have. You have $100 million in the bank. You just don't know it. I'm here to tell you. You have a neshama. Your neshama is longing to be aligned with Hashem. You just don't know it. I'm not here to give you Torah and mitzvahs. I'm here to help you take what's rightfully yours. And this is what happened with the Yidden. They are innately, quote, believers in Hashem. You don't have to prove it to them. You just have to pull away all of the corrosion that is cluttered. You just have to get rid of all of the corrosion and like clogged pipes. You need to clean them out. Same thing anytime a person has this. Anytime somebody says, I can't find the godliness in this, there's no way to see godliness. This is where we start to doubt our own emunah. We don't need to import amuna. You don't need to be given amuna. You have amuna. What happened? It gets cluttered. Just like health. A person, God willing, is born healthy. What happens? We eat potato chips, we get heartburn. We need to stop eating the potato chips. Stop pursuing all of these things. But it's so hard because the constant clamor and drumbeat of the world is that's what's important. Whether it's, quote, success or it's the nonsensical pursuits of whether it's social status or fashion or politics or sports or whatever it is, we get so caught up in it that we forgot what we're doing here. And everybody around us going, yeah, this is real. It's not real. It's not. That is, you are innately a maimin. What is the most classic line in all of Chabad? Excuse me, are you Jewish? Once that you want to do mitzvahs, that's what you want. But you forgot about it. We forgot that that's what we want. We started thinking of ourselves by our accomplishments. It's like when a person starts to say, this is who I am, my job, my shoe size. I mean, no one would say, hi, I'm a doctor. No one would say, hi, I'm shoe size 9. That's ridiculous because that's not my identity. And one day you're not going to doctor anymore. One day you're not going to live in that town anymore. One day you're not going to drive that car. All those things go away. We know it. We know that. But what is truly who I am? I'm a Jew and I fear Hashem. But what happens? We get so cluttered that we forget about it. So we might think, well, what can we do? I'm trapped. You're not trapped because all those things are false. We have to expose them, but it's very hard because then I have to recognize that I kind of invested a lot of time in that falseness. I kind of put a lot of effort into that falseness. And the ultimate tragedy is the Yetzer Hara knows it too. He knows it better than anybody that he's kidding. He knows it better than anyone that he's acting. He knows it. He doesn't even believe it. But he has no choice. He's been given the authority to confuse you. B'divrei sheker, with lies, umirma, and trickery. L'harbe schare, in order to increase your strength. Kipite hazoina leben hamelech, like the example of the king who hires the woman to try and seduce his son. She doesn't want him to succeed, but she's got an assignment to do. She knows that it's all false. She knows it's not true. B'sheker umirma, they have to use their falseness and their trickery, b'shus hamelech, again, because the king has given that assignment. Once the king pulls the plug, game over. But we get so caught up in what we're doing, we forgot it's a play. We forgot it's acting. We forgot it's not real. We get so caught up. And again, imagine a kid, whatever he's doing is painting, and now Shabbos comes. He said, but I'm painting. The painting is not real. That Shabbos is real. That's reality. But my job, again, these are not, it's not that it's unimportant, but it's not real. And we all know, because it's all going to go away. One day, we're not going to have those things. One day, those things are going to go away. I want to point out, we have a moment here, a curious technical point which the Alter Rebbe makes. The Alter Rebbe says that the Jews in the story of the spies responded with this newfound faith in Hashem, even though God did not show them any signs, any wonders. We say, hold on, I'm going to put it up here on the screen. So hopefully you can see it. This is the actual pasuk, right? What happened? As for the men whom Moses sent to inspect the land or return from the mission, causing tongue to complain against them, these men, who spreading reports about the land, died in a plague before God. So what happens, except for Yeshua and Kalev, and Moshe relates all these words. And then what happens here in 40? They rose up early in the morning, and they said, we're ready to go up to the place that God said he would give us. So how can the Alter Rebbe say that they didn't see any miracle? They saw the death of the men who spread the plague. And if you're all familiar that their tongues fell out, that it was this whole distorted form of death. So what does the Alter Rebbe mean that nothing happened? Meaning the message being not just a gotcha on some technical point. The Alter Rebbe's argument is that any time I have a form of doubt, I have the capacity on my own to discover the godliness that's innate within me. I have the capacity on my own to reawaken my innate faith. I don't need Hashem to initiate. I have to initiate. But the story of the spies, Hashem does initiate. He causes them to die. So we got the answer. Two answers. One is conceptually, meaning the death of these men is not innately a message as to why, yes, you're going to be successful. Meaning, if you don't believe that God can defeat the bad guys, how is the death of these two spies suddenly convincing you that God can defeat the bad guys? It's not a correlation that somehow God says, wait, I got a special weapon or I got a strategy or let me show you. Again, of course, nobody doubted even in that moment that God could kill two Jews. They doubted that he could kill the 31 kings who occupied the land. So even though they saw this, it would not, it doesn't address their core question. That's one interpretation. And that's why the Alter Rebbe says we don't find anywhere in the pasuk that it says that. It doesn't say that God showed them any greater capacity. But then, just to finish this idea, we find something else that's curious. So here in the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim, in chapter 580, this is the Tur Shulchan Aruch, which preceded what we call the Shulchan Aruch. He's talking about the laws of fasts and all the different tragic things that occurred on different days when we have different fasts. And you see here something curious. On the 17th of Elul, now, the spies return on Tisha B'Av. So he's saying that it took 5 weeks later, those who slandered the land died. That they didn't die immediately, even though the pasuk seems to say pretty explicitly that they did die immediately. But here we see in the Tur Shulchan Aruch, and it's brought in other commentaries as well, that that's not perhaps the actual factual history, that perhaps they died a month later. So again, when we ask the question, when the Alter Rebbe says that we don't find that the pasuk showed them any miraculous transformation that should somehow persuade them that God can, in fact, displace the 31 kings, even when they saw the death of these two spies, it didn't address their innate concern. And again, even in halachic sources, we see at least this one opinion that the death of the spies actually occurred over a month after. So that just touches it up. And again, the core point being, you don't need this fire to get hotter to excite your neshama. It's there innately. We just got to clear out all the schmutz that's clogged it up so that its natural thriving can come to the fore. The end.